across the country, counties are proposing to build new, larger jails. Community groups, organizers, and activists have successfully pushed back on a number of these proposals. However, they often see the proposals being reinitiated year after year, causing them to focus resources on defensive fights and having less time to push and explore progressive reforms aimed at reducing the number of people incarcerated. Today, we're going to talk to organizers who've successfully pushed back on proposals to build bigger jails and explore an alternative strategy aimed at pausing the year-end and year-out fights to prevent counties from moving ahead on jail expansion. We're also hoping to have time to discuss how records requests, technical challenges, and interventions in jail assessment processes and analysis of such assessments can help in these fights. I'm just going to double look at the poll results now and share the results with you all. So it looks like a number of folks here are here because of a general interest in the topic, but also a good proportion of you are in counties where a new jail is being proposed or where you've actively been involved or are engaging in a jail fight to stop a jail from being expanded or constructed. So as we head into our discussion today, I just wanted to do a quick introduction. My name is Nyla Wan, and I'm the Director of Advocacy at Prison Policy Initiative. Today, I'm excited to have Mallory Honora, Executive Director of Families for Justice's Healing in Massachusetts and a proud member of the National Council, and Sashi James, Director of Reimagining Communities at the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. Mallory and Sashi's organizations are both leading an important legislative effort in Massachusetts to establish a 5-year moratorium on jail and prison construction or expansion. And Crystal Kowalski, founding member of Building Justice in Berks, which is located in Pennsylvania. Building Justice in Berks has been actively and successfully pushing back on the county's proposal to build a larger jail and aims to monitor the planning and building of the new Berks County jail. You'll also likely hear from 2 additional Prison Policy Initiative staff members, Wendy Sawyer, our research director, who might be providing some additional information during this discussion, and Emily Widra, our senior research analyst, who will be reviewing your questions as they come in and fielding them at the end of today's webinar. Now, Crystal, I'd like to start with you. Your Pennsylvania County was trying to build a bigger jail based on community action focused on reducing the jail population and pushing back against the need for a larger facility. You've all gotten the county to change its plans. Can you tell us how you first learned about your county's plan to build a bigger jail, how your coalition came together, and maybe most importantly, how your group managed to get a seat at the table during the jail assessment phase when we frequently see that only criminal legal system actors like sheriffs, prosecutors, judges, and jail administrators are being consulted?
Thank you, Nyla. First, I want to thank you, Nyla, for holding this webinar on Prison Policy Initiative and for having me be a panelist and for also your incredible data and reports. We have used those and they have been really helpful. I want to thank everybody who's attending the webinar, and it is really an honor to be on this panel with Mallory and Sashi. So I'll start with how we knew we were building a new jail, and that was by attending county commissioners board meetings. So I initially went because the county, I guess I saw in the newspaper, the county was thinking about privatizing the jail. And so I went to a commissioners meeting, and then I just stayed attending those meetings. And by attending on a weekly basis and studying agendas and paying really close attention to budget proposals that happen, like presentations happen in November, you could see what's coming down the pike. And what we saw was that they would be building a new jail and contracting with CGL. Our core group of Building Justice in Berks came together also through county commissioners meetings. The core group of us knew each other from a previous battle to keep our county-owned nursing home in county hands. This was a long and pretty involved fight. It went on for about 1.5 years. So during that time, we built relationships with each other, and we figured out how the county works, how they make decisions, and how we could impact those decisions. So that was a group that had done something previously together. We were the core group. our first action was to send a private letter to the stakeholders, the prison board, which is the commissioners, the DA, other stakeholders, saying, we understand that you're going to contract with CGL. We are asking you to also get information from agencies that do criminal justice reform and have current data. So we recommended Prison Policy Initiative, and we recommended the Vera Institute. We had this letter signed by community leaders. So we basically tried to gather the most powerful, impactful people we could that look like, broad-based community support, not just activists. So this letter went out to them. That was the initial action. We got a couple of responses. Then the core group got together and we expanded by holding a criminal justice film series. And we also in that reached out to a bunch of community groups to partner with us. And by holding this series, the audience that gathered was really diverse and amazing. And we invited all the stakeholders in the county to attend, and to our surprise, they did. We had commissioners come, we had people from Safe Berks come, and it was like a series of 4 films. So they were week after week. So once we started getting some people coming, I think there was a feeling of expectation maybe that they should attend. So they did, and that really helped us to connect. CGL also sent representatives to this film series. We got press coverage, and that also helped us broaden our reach. Originally, Nyla, we were talking about what the greatest challenges were that we faced, and I think that's an important thing to bring up. I think staying ahead of like upcoming action items and decision points and getting press releases out prior to decisions being made by the county. So the way that that's done is by covering every single meeting if you can. And that was operations meetings, jail board meetings, commissioners meetings, steering committee for the jail project meetings. An example of why this is important was I was at a prison board meeting, and at the end of the meeting, they're saying, oh, something about this meeting on Thursday at 11:15. And I thought, wait, there's not meetings on Thursday at 11:15. They're at 10 and 1. So I contacted the county. I said, I heard this in this meeting, and what is this meeting? And they said, oh, it's the visioning session with CGL. And I said, oh, and they said, well, you can come if you want. And so that day before, 3 of us in the core group changed around our schedules, got to that visioning session the next day. And it was a really important meeting to be at, right? And we would not have been notified or known about it had we not been at that other meeting. All right, now to the being able to speak with CGL, the people who did the assessment. And I thought about this, and I think it happened for a number of reasons. I would say I'm going to enumerate them. One, our history here in Berks County. Berks County had a bad history in criminal justice. Berks County had a woman die in our jail in June of 2014. She was in there serving a 48-hour sentence on an inability to pay truancy fines, $2,000 in truancy fines. The woman who was in the jail cell with her was in there on parking tickets. She notified them that she was having problems. She died of a heart attack because she didn't get medical service. And that got national attention. Losing my place, sorry. Okay, so that got national attention, and it also awoke in local activists. That's how I got involved in all of this. I was reading that article, and I'm like, everything about it was shocking, literally everything. So that was number one in that happened. Then we had other, we held other kind of records. We had the highest constable pay. We had the highest amount of non-traffic cases in one MDJ's office. We had the highest amounts of incarceration on failure to post collateral. And this is in Pennsylvania, so in all the counties in Pennsylvania, we were twice as high as the second place county, which was York, on incarcerating people for failure to post collateral. That's like bail on very low level summary offenses. On all these things, we had fantastic press coverage and really in-depth investigative reporting. And at that time, the newspaper was giving a lot of room to this reporting. It connected us together. It connected us with the ACLU, which really helped. Number two, we have at least one commissioner who I believe has a true interest in criminal justice reform. And he happens to be the head commissioner and a Republican. This helps us a lot that he has these feelings. Number three, the Board of Commissioners saw how we fought to keep Berks County, that was the nursing home, in public hands. And they knew we had the drive and the connections to collect the data and to make it public. So from the beginning, they emphasized how transparent this jail building project was going to be. And we tried to hold them to it. We attended every meeting, we commented, we placed right to know requests. We held a very public film series with broad-based community partners and invited all the stakeholders. The number four, so CGL also attended our film series, which helped connect us with CGL. On the model of CGL and how they were going about business, we conducted our own stakeholder meetings. So we had meetings with the MDJs, pretrial services, parole and probation, some of the commissioners, community leaders, the warden and the deputy warden. And on a regular basis, if we had a question, we just emailed CGL directly. And they would get back to us and they would answer our question. We submitted daily right to know requests for the daily jail admission logs. This gave us information about jail population and level of offense, and the people who were in jail on a kind of a introductory level. But it also let, I think, the county know and CGL know that we knew all this. And then last one, number six, we were a constant presence for years, and we always approached every comment using the subject we, presuming that these decisions will be made with input from the community. This past November, the commissioners announced that they were taking the next year to reduce the jail population to below 700 people, and we plan to help them surpass their goal. And I'm open to any questions and talking after this. I know that was a barrage of information. Thank you, Nyla.
Thanks, Crystal. And Mallory and Sashi, as mentioned at the outset, jail expansion efforts frequently revive year after year in counties, but you all are kind of trying to flip the script in this fight against jail expansion and construction by leading an effort to get the Massachusetts legislature to pass a jail and prison moratorium bill. Can you describe what that looks like, why you chose this strategy, and the obstacles you faced in advancing that legislation?
I'll start. So my name is Sashi, and I'm with Families for Justice Healing International Council. And we wrote the moratorium bill following the leadership of formerly incarcerated women. Our organization is an abolitionist organization that's founded by formerly incarcerated women. So it was founded inside of a prison. And we do believe that they have the vision and that we follow their leadership. And so formerly incarcerated women directly impacted women wrote a prison and jail moratorium bill because, one, we tried many angles, which was like write letters to the board of directors of HDR, who actually has the contract in Massachusetts for the women's prison, but we tried to have conversations with architects. Some were successful, which thank you to the architects that actually pulled out and chose not to move forward with this project. But some architects, one primarily being HDR, decided not to pull out of this project, and also decided to blatantly ignore formerly incarcerated women, directly impacted women, and our allies from across Massachusetts and even broader from across the country, because they're the second largest architectural firm in the country that's just building prisons and jails everywhere. And so so we wrote a prison and jail moratorium bill because our first attempts were just being ignored. And the prison and jail moratorium bill is a 5-year pause on all construction on prisons and jails for 5 years, which we believe that it will, first, we believe that this could be a beautiful model across the country because one, it's exhausting to keep fighting prisons and jail construction we don't have the capacity as the people. We're trying to heal people. We're trying to create I'm going to scale back. We're not trying to create what different looks like. We are creating what different looks like. And that takes a lot of our time and energy and everything in itself. So to continue to fight prisons and jails, construction, when we know that if they build a bed, they're going to fill the bed, it's exhausting. And so the prison and jail moratorium bill gives communities like mine, which I live in Roxbury, which is primarily a Black and Brown community. It just happens to sit in the most incarcerated corridor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so we know that this new prison and jail is only going to impact communities like mine. And it's just going to cause further harm. And so 5 years looks like we'll be able to just have like a breathing period of like, look at all the beautiful things that we're creating that $50 million can actually go towards versus why would we be spending $50 million on a new women's prison? And like, in addition to saying we want a 5-year moratorium, we're also saying that because in Massachusetts, it's like a plan to spend $200 million on new women's prisons like over the next 10 years. It might even be 500. I've been saying so many millions of dollars that's not getting funded to us, but to DOC and all these architects to build prisons and jails. So I apologize if that number isn't completely accurate, but we're also challenging and saying the amount of money that what you're planning to spend on prisons and jails over the next 5 years, you need to give that directly to the communities that are mostly impacted, that would have been impacted once we get this prison and jail infrastructure in place, moratorium in place. The beautiful process of it all is that we know as movement people, there's no power greater than the power of the people. And the power of the people in Massachusetts has spoken. We did a 90-mile walk across Massachusetts, which was like just a raising awareness walk where we talked to people that were not impacted by incarceration and actually had yard signs in their community that said back the blue. And it was so funny because like in our community, it's like the total opposite. You know what I mean? Like here's a community where you see grass, trees, and like happiness. And then you go into our community where it's just like a gloom. And you can see like, we're like, keep the police out. And then they're like, no, we want the police. And it's like, well, obviously we can see where resources are lacking. And why shouldn't we be creating what different looks like? But out of the 90-mile walk, we were able to shift the conversation from yes to building new prisons or even backing the blue to like saying, you know what, we need to be giving communities what they need. And a jail and prison is only going to cause more harm. And it's also setting us back generations and decades and just beyond, because it's not, when you talk about building a new prison, you're not talking about my generation, although my generation is impacted, but you're also talking about my daughter, my daughter's daughter, my daughter's daughter's daughter, because that building is not going to just get destroyed out of nowhere, And so that's where we're headed. And we have a beautiful infrastructure, which we call reimagining communities. And so I love the fact that like, when we talk about creating what different looks like, everybody's like, oh, well, why should we have a prison and jail moratorium bill? Because why don't you want to build a new prison and jail? And like, what should we be doing instead? And like, the answer is that we should be investing in communities. Like, if you see a problem, invest in it, figure out how we can respond to the harm and create healing. So that way we know that if you create a healthy, thriving person, that they can go off and create healthy, thriving communities. And that should be our only focus. And I'm going to kick it to Mal in case you would like to add something.
Sure. I think I can, so I don't know if we're out of time. I can definitely answer in the next question.
I was going to say, if you want to take a few minutes, please go ahead and take a minute.
Okay, awesome. I mean, Sasha, you said it beautifully. I think the only thing I would add is, we have the dubious distinction of MCI Framingham being the oldest operating women's prison in the United States of America. So what we're saying in our organizing is empty MCI Framingham, close it forever, and never rebuild or replace it. And so when we talk about conditions of confinement, we're led by women who have lived in some of the oldest, most decrepit, most disgusting prisons in the United States. They survived that. And they know that any building anywhere is going to become that same level of devolved and disgusting. And the harm that happens is both physical in the environment as well as cultural, right? Everything that women go through when they're separated from their children, all of the sexual violence, all of the abuse that our incarcerated community experiences. So for us, as Sashi mentioned, it's really talking about what else is possible, what different looks like. So the prison and jail construction moratorium does leave room to make needed essential repairs for the quality of incarcerated people's lives. What it prevents is massive construction projects for the purposes of doing exactly what Sashi said, which is extending the capability of that building to incarcerate people for 150 more years. And there's this in Massachusetts, and your states probably have, unique histories as well. We have a record of county leaders meeting in the 1870s, talking about what they should do for incarcerating women because it's not safe to incarcerate women with men. And the best thing that they could come up with was building MCI Framingham, the women's prison. So part of our organizing has been 150 years later. Shame on you if the best thing you can think of is another version of MCI Framingham, right? Like, we refuse to accept that. We won't go along with that. But what we're absolutely not saying is let women sit in there. So all of our organizing on the ground, our participatory defense work, our campaign work to free the mothers, free individual women, like, we're doing everything possible and exploring every single pathway to release and talking with people about how that's possible as we're organizing for this pause. And just to emphasize, that's what that 5 years is for, to focus on doing that work instead of digging holes in the ground where we're going to bury women for another 4 generations.
Nyla, if you don't mind, I just wanted to add one more thing. I'm really sorry. This question gets us going. But I also wanted to put it out there that we've done a listening tour. That was a 2.5-year listening tour where we asked women across the country, women and girls, what people needed and what caused them to end up on a prison bunk. Like, how could we have supported? Even a question of like, what made you happy, so that way you would never end up in a question bunk, which is something that even as a young Black girl in the community, I have never been really asked, except for my mom, who's Andrea James. She's always like, but she's a little bit different. But like, what makes you happy? And and we have the research to show what our people need, so that way we're not spending $167,000 in Massachusetts on incarcerating a woman. And the most important thing that I always lead with is that when we did our listening tour in Massachusetts, one of the things that came out of the listening tour, which as a mother, it hits me so hard, is that the number one reason why women are ended up incarcerated in Massachusetts is because of lack of access to affordable housing. And so I like to always emphasize that 82% of those women are mothers. And so when you say that a mother doesn't have access to affordable housing, we're also talking about children. And then we're also thinking about the most vulnerable thing you would do as a mother to be able to ensure that your child has access to housing or food or just basic needs that most communities have that ours does not. And so when you talk about spending $167,000 a year to keep a woman incarcerated, and then you think like, for me, I pay about maybe $28,000 a year for housing. The numbers are not adding up, and like, that's like literally 4 or 5 women that we could provide housing for if we actually focused on what the people needed, versus not keep allowing a business to keep oppressing a certain group of people. I just wanted to uplift that.
No, I really appreciate that, because I think it really points to how we need to be looking at different strategies that will, in fact, reduce the number of people coming into contact with the criminal legal system in the first place, and reducing the number of people who ever experience incarceration. I want to kind of take us a little bit to talk about some other strategies next. So besides public awareness campaigns and legislative strategies, I'm interested in hearing about other kinds of tactics you've all tried to pause, delay, obstruct jail construction and expansion. And Mallory and Sashi, specifically, I'd be interested in hearing about the technical challenge you all brought using the Massachusetts RFP process, maybe explain what an RFP is. And then Crystal, if you could discuss how you all have used public records in Berks County, I think that would be helpful for folks.
Sure. So, we're organizing to stop the new women's prison by any means yet necessary. So we're using all the tools in the toolbox. And we found out that they were going to build the new women's prison because overnight, in a move of crisis and chaos that was incredibly harmful to women's lives, they shipped out about 200 women from the state prison. These are county sentenced women and women being held before their trial. They'd been at the state prison. They moved those women to South Bay, which is the county jail. And we immediately raised the red flag about that and said, why is this happening? Women weren't notified. Their families weren't notified. The community was not engaged at all. What else is possible besides trapping women in yet another jail, a jail that's locked down for even longer? And also terrible conditions. And through that, that's how it got exposed that this, just months later, an RFP came out, a request for proposal. So it's like the bidding process for companies to win the contract to do the first phase of the work. So I think that's another thing that I would say is like, anytime you can intervene, even if it's already in process, like you should do it. And if there's shovels in the ground, like, get your people together for some civil disobedience, right? Like, but in any case, in every phase of the process, there's like, hopefully an intervention that you can find. So the first phase in Massachusetts is a study and design phase. It's still incredibly expensive, $550,000. And like Sashi mentioned, what grassroots groups can do on the ground with that money is far different than what these multi-billion-dollar, sometimes global companies can do just business as usual. So we're talking about HDR that was awarded this contract, built 270 jails and prisons in the United States. Absolutely directly affected people, are trying to hold them accountable for profiting off our people's suffering and bondage. And so that's ongoing. But in any case, in Massachusetts, and I'm sure where you are, there's like some laws and statutes that govern how you have to advertise these projects. And they very often don't follow them because this is an old boys network where they're trying to give whoever they want to give the money to, or they're trying to do it as quickly and as expeditiously as possible and cut out the public from any feedback, right? So we did some research on what the state statutes are. And in fact, there's this old part of it where you have to list the request for proposals. You have to publish that the job was announced in multiple newspapers. And so we have a crew of allies and supporters to help us do this type of research. We did the legal research. We had folks look in all the newspapers when it was supposed to be published. They didn't follow the law. And so the way that you file a complaint about that in Massachusetts is with the Attorney General's office. We had no idea. We know that the Attorney General is a top cop. We know she does some consumer stuff. We're like, okay, whatever. But as it turns out, there's something called a bid unit office that is responsible for oversight for how these contracts are distributed and awarded. And it's actually super important. And some of you might already be engaged in this work because it's also a massive racial justice issue. So in Massachusetts, the overwhelming majority of all state contracts go to white-owned companies. So it's a major there's tons of issues in this area, no matter which way you look at it. And so anyways, part of the reason why we want to pass the jail and prison construction moratorium is because this takes months of energy and effort to figure out how this works. So formerly incarcerated women with incarcerated loved ones, community members are like sitting at a table in our office, like with our computers open, literally teaching ourselves how the process works in local government to get from here's their vision, their plan. And by the way, you should read it anyways, because reading the state's language about what they want to do with our people, like really grounds you in why we have to be on point about our resistance at every step in the way. They're trying to build this as a trauma-informed prison, like all these disgusting words that we know is just synonyms for suffering and harm, right? It's just business as usual in a different building. So in any case, we learned a lot about what they were planning to do, and we had to teach ourselves the process. But what we were able to do, we were right. It was as plain as day that they did not follow the law. And so interestingly enough, what they did in order to not have the ruling and again, I'm sorry, I should say that in Massachusetts, the agency that manages these projects, it basically has a project manager role, is called the Department of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance. So you and your team can figure out which of your state or local agencies actually does the day-to-day work of pushing these contracts. It's likely not your Department of Correction or your Sheriff's Department. There's another agency that's managing the land and managing the water issues, et cetera, all points of where you can push. but they very clearly didn't follow the law. And so in order to not get a ruling from the Attorney General's office that they were out of compliance, they actually withdrew the bid. And that bought us months and months and more time. Then we challenged them again because they knew that we were now looking, they knew we were mobilizing, they knew we were making noise, and they tried to bury this project inside of another contract called a house doctor contract, which is basically an architect on retainer. I don't need to go on all those details, but they tried a shady way to hide it from public scrutiny within an existing contract. So there wasn't a public bid process. That actually got leaked by a staff person of DCAM. And so we filed yet another administrative challenge. And there's no arguing that they were clearly wrong about this as well. And so again, and we were prepared for a hearing at the Attorney General's office. We had submitted pages and pages of documents. The 11th hour, the night before the hearing, they yet again withdrew the proposal, which again bought us months and months more time, and they had to refile it a third time. And so every time that meant that we got to show up to more hearings, we got to talk to more leaders, we got to build more power, and we got to delay the process so that we could keep organizing. And Sash, do you want to add anything?
No, I know we're at time, but the most beautiful process is that we also got to learn more and more. So that's why we can give all our knowledge to the people in the movement, so that way everybody else doesn't have to go through this draining process.
That was amazing. I was so involved with what Mallory and Sashi were saying that I forgot the question. So right to know requests and how they impacted the fight, was that it? Okay.
Yeah,
I
like
already
how you all used right to know requests.
Yeah, I went long first. So I did touch on this. We do a daily right to know request for the jail logs. I think basically it just shows that we know what's going on. Like, so recently, a little example would be, well, a couple examples. During the pandemic, our county was putting people in jail, weekenders, right, in jail during the pandemic. So like you saw that and you're thinking, what's the stop the spread? You're taking people in and out, and we're seeing people going in for non-support now, which we had not for years, and that's happening. Low-level offenses. And Sashi mentioned, you know, it's exhausting. It's exhausting work to have to just like every single day put this in, but you know, if you don't do it and they don't feel you watching, that it's going to go back to the way it was.
Great. And Wendy, I think maybe you have like something you can briefly add about how we saw one other partner organization in Michigan use public records requests.
Yeah, that's right. Some folks from Otsego County in Michigan reached out to us when, for the umpteenth time, the county was trying to push this new jail. And they reached out just sort of like for some kind of outside perspective. But it was very similar to like Crystal, the way you described your coalition. It was just folks who were very new to the issue and were just going to meetings and trying to figure it out. But they had an attorney amongst their numbers who realized that they could do a public records request because they had this argument they were using to try and justify or rationalize having a bigger jail, which was, oh, we've got like 1,100 outstanding warrants, as if all these people are roaming the streets and are so dangerous. So they actually did a public records request to see what those outstanding warrants were for. And a ton of them were just bench warrants that were a million years old, that were for, you know, oh, someone missed a court appearance, so there's a bench warrant out. But very, very little of it was anything that would actually be jailable, especially because this jail was being proposed after the state had just passed all of these sort of pre-trial reforms. So a lot of these offenses that folks were getting arrested for were not jailable offenses anymore. So we were able to kind of break down that list of outstanding warrants and go, okay, well, only this many actually look like they'd even be jailable. So this is no way to rationalize a bigger jail. And I think that was pretty persuasive for folks because that was a key part of their communications strategy in that county. So.
Yeah, and I think that what all of this underscores is just the importance of like understanding the rules and the laws in your like county and your state and knowing what different levers there are to pull, because folks have sometimes been able to stop construction by forcing something onto the ballot. Or one other person we talked to actually got communication between the county and the jail assessment authors where they basically were like, oh, the sheriff wants us to actually propose a larger jail, so we should include that in the assessment. And that was used to publicize it and defeat the jail. So I mean, really understanding what these different mechanisms are, I think are important, because you never know which ones are going to be the strategies that can help you win in your county. Now, again, a slight shift in topic. Mallory and Sashi, when you all were talking earlier, you were talking about, you know, what alternatives might, some of what the alternatives might look like to incarceration. And I know you've worked to like redirect the conversation in that way, away from incarceration and one that's directed towards alternatives. Can you talk a little bit more about the sort of alternatives to incarceration people should be thinking about and advancing, and how kind of the shifting the conversation in that way fits in with your strategy?
Well, I like to think of it, and this is just from like a visionary perspective and like a person that is on the ground and directly impacted. I like to think of it as not as an alternative, but as preventatives. And so, like, what can we be exploring that does not include incarceration? So, like, for an example, we're actually working on the ground, and like, I'm not going to say that it's only us, because we have a beautiful infrastructure that is called Reimagining Communities that was created through a listening tour from across the country. So it's not only the National Council's work, it's not Families for Justice Healing's work, it's the people's work, because we really got on the ground and listened to what the people said that they wanted. And then we created an infrastructure that really addressed the root issues of what even had people land on a prison bunk. And so, for an example, there are crisis response teams where we know that in Massachusetts, we're working to create every 4 blocks, we're going to have a crisis response crew, that if there's any mental health breakdown, mental health issues, or anything and beyond that are just day-to-day issues that need to be addressed, the crisis response team will be able to provide that resource to the people. But in addition to that, they're not going to be people that come from other communities. They're going to be people that are from that community. And we know that if we have people that are from the community responding to people that are in the community, you will get a better outcome immediately. You have a better chance of de-escalating situations. You have a better chance of just preventing situations. You have just a better conversation with people that you know and you can trust. And then even beyond, we have the basic income, we have basic housing. We mentioned earlier that the number one reason in Massachusetts that even ends up to have women have any interaction with incarceration is because they don't have access to affordable housing. We have a basic housing program where we're providing housing for women that have children that just need a place to stay, and they can feel safe, so they don't feel like they have to take from Peter to pay Paul or whatever. You know, you can actually pay your rent, feed your children, and survive. We're in speaking of surviving, you know, the community that I live in, we have been in survival mode forever. And this is what is leading us directly to incarceration, right? Because of the pain, the suffering, the oppression, the visions, that the unheard visions that people don't want to believe in. And so while we're creating all of those things, you know, we're really allowing women to just live in the community. And I mean, like, how beautiful is that to actually see women that have been directly impacted, oppressed, struggling to take care of their kids, fighting to keep their kids, rebuilding their relationship with their kids because they were incarcerated on a prison bunk and were separated from their children, and now they're reestablishing their children. But now they don't have to worry about all the things that would have landed them into prison, because all they need to worry about is focusing on healing. And so we're giving communities the tools that they need. We have 3 hydroponic farms. One is in Pittsburgh, one is in Roxbury, which got landed a couple of weeks ago, which will be able to teach people how to grow vegetables, and then we'll be also giving the vegetables away for free. That's responding to food justice. I mean, we have so many infrastructures, and it's not only us. It's it's other states across the country that are also doing these things, so that way they can stop the transgressions in communities from communities causing harm just because they need specific things and they don't have the things that they need. So communities are actually working, community members are working to provide the tools that people need. And you know, I was on a call the other day, and we were just talking about like what communities need and like the different infrastructures or whatever, what people need. And one of the things that came out was like, you know, welfare versus basic income. And I just really wanted to emphasize and show that, yes, you know, they have systems that provide welfare and food stamps and Section 8 and all of these things. But we have to also understand that a lot of these city implemented structures only cause further harm and literally keep people oppressed. And I know one of our basic income recipients had said to me, when she got a student loan, because she's in college, when she got a student loan, the housing authority threatened to take away her housing because she got a student loan. So now we're telling people who are on housing, who are trying to get more education, that they can't get education. So you just have to understand the barriers and the difference between what basic income looks like. What we're saying is like, sometimes people need an extra push. Sometimes people need to just be given $500 a month just because they need to pay their phone bill. They need to buy extra food. I always love when I'm like, oh, I got a stipend. Sometimes I get paid to do a call and I'm like, I got a stipend, which is very rare, but I'm very appreciative of it as a single mother and the struggle, you know? And so many other people are appreciative of that. And that is very different from you asking a person for their social security number, you having all of the, you know, restrictions on the way people should and should not spend their money, or you just having restrictions on how much education they should get. And so we're really just trying to figure out, and we are figuring out what we can do to support the people, build the people, empower the people, and just be all about the people and not create systems that cause further harm. And that means that we have to dismantle the current system that we have and build a system that is for all people and not a specific class of people. And is this a perfect time for me to just jump right in with my Free Her Institute? Because you know I'm really proud of that. And speaking of creating what different looks like, the National Council of Feminist for Justice as Healing, the women in the community, we're working to create a space where women can you know, work on policy, research. They can go to a space where it's like we can cook breakfast together, we can train each other, we can just exist. I always use this as an example, but I want to say this. So I had in Massachusetts, I learned that there is a retreat. It's like a retreat area for police officers. So when police see, it's called academy, like police academy or something like that. Maybe I'm mixing the name up with Chicago, but the police academy that they had built in Chicago, HDR also built that. But anyway, so they have a center where if they witness like, you know, maybe an aggressive situation, or they go through a traumatic experience or mental health, they can go to a home and they can like be around animals and milk cows and get meals cooked for them and just like woosah for like 3 or 4 days. It's covered by the insurance. You can go whenever you want. It's like a small grant that just covers them. They cook, they get separated from their family. You know, they just like take a deep breath. Communities witness all of this and above, right? We actually live in it all day long, community members. I'm like, and we still have to go inside the house, especially women, mothers, still go inside the house and cook meals for our family, still provide. Most of our households are single family households now, being that we've been at a 700% increase of incarcerated women. Sometimes our grandmothers are taking care of the family because our mothers are now incarcerated as well. But the point is that our people need the same resources and beyond. So that way we can heal. As I mentioned earlier, healthy, thriving people create healthy, thriving communities. And so we have an inherited land on Martha's Vineyard on Oak Bluffs, which is a historical landmark for Black people. And we're working to build a retreat center that is $1.5 million, because we did the land survey and everything to build the most beautiful retreat center that will support the people. And so we are selling Free Her t-shirts. They're called the Free Her Institute t-shirts. And this is really going to be a groundbreaking retreat center, because it's going to allow women to come and learn, research, think, and do all of the work that Mallory and I talked about around the prison and jail moratorium bill. I mean, that was work that we just were like head banging on walls to just try to get. But being that we literally created an infrastructure, we can now go to the retreat center and show women the blueprint of what we have. So that way women are not spinning wheels in their community and doing the same thing that we had to do and beyond. What does reimagining communities look like? What does it look like to create basic income? What does it look like to create a housing program? What does it look like to bring a hydroponic farm to your neighborhood? Just like all of these beautiful processes. And then also, what does it look like to just sit there and relax? Or maybe go read a book on the beach, or maybe go see some greenery. I told y'all already, I'm not into the greenery, but some people may be into the greenery. I know Andrea is, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build a center that is for the women. And we need people to buy t-shirts to support all the processes. All the fees from the t-shirts go directly to building this retreat center, and it's for the people. And I'm really excited. And this is what we mean when we say we need to create and build what different looks like. And of course, like I said, there's no power stronger than the power of the people, because this is one of the most beautifulest centers that will probably be built in my lifetime for me. And that's because of the power in the people, not because of the government or anybody else. It's because we are believing in the power of the people, which is the directly impacted women and girls, or the most vulnerable population.
Thank you so much, Sashi. And we're going to just jump into kind of sharing some of the different resources PPI has that folks might find helpful in some of these fights. We're then going to be going into the question and answer, and we'll be giving each of the panelists like a few minutes to kind of make a brief closing remark. So just to shift over to that right very quickly, let's see. So before turning to the question and answer segment, like I said, we wanted to quickly share a few resources PPI has been made available for folks fighting jail expansion. The first two slides I'm going to go over just provide information on materials ranging from reports to briefings to training documents that Prison Policy Initiative has created that you might find helpful when a jail proposal is being advanced. Does our county really need a bigger jail? Outlines mechanisms for decarceration the county should take into account before a new jail is even proposed, or any sort of progress is made in like a proposal. Smoke and Mirrors provides an in-depth look at a jail assessment report completed by a private group asserting that a Michigan county needed a new jail. Arguments against jail expansion provides findings about jail overcrowding, counter arguments against jail expansion, and points of intervention in jail fights. And our how-to guide for critically reviewing jail assessments provides questions that should be asked and considerations that should be taken into account when examining a jail assessment. I'm going to quickly outline some of what's provided in this final guide. Given that jail assessment analysis are really one of the things we receive the most questions from groups that are fighting jail expansion about. To start, jail assessments, which may be referred to by several names, are analyses often conducted by private companies who have been hired by a county to analyze the operations of the current jail and make recommendations for building a new jail or expanding an existing one. These assessments are done before any final decisions are made and often are filled with faulty assumptions, misleading data, and are rife with other problems. So we put this guide together to help folks spot some common problems that exist in jail assessments. Problematic assumptions are often made. It's often important to consider what those assumptions are. For example, most assumptions Most assessments assume no change in the status quo. That means that if reforms are moving, there's no analysis of what the impact of those reforms might be. And even when reforms have passed that will directly reduce the number of people being incarcerated, the assessments may entirely ignore the impact and realities of those already enacted reforms. Oftentimes, only individuals whose opinions are taken into account in assessments are those who work within the current criminal legal system, like the police, the sheriffs, jail administrators, and district attorneys. The voices of community members, people directly impacted by the criminal legal system, mental health and substance use disorder providers are not even part of the process in most instances. The numbers, the data, the graphs, and the trend lines themselves can be highly misleading. For example, if the image on the top had started with any year after 2012, it would have shown a decline rather than an increase in the number of cases pending. Or the trend line on the image furthest to the right of the screen shows an upward trend, despite the final year 2017's numbers being below those of 2008, and there have been a significant downward shift in the final few years on that graph. Also, keep in mind that the data provided in the assessments themselves can be used to identify reforms that, if implemented, could immediately reduce the jail population. For example, what would the jail population numbers look like if the county were to end reincarceration for technical or non-criminal violations of probation or parole, or enact bail reform and reduce its pre-trial population? These assessments are also often advocating for jails that place what should be community provided services available to people with substance use disorders, mental illness, and sometimes even chronic or terminal conditions into the jail. Questions helpful to ask, as well as common themes or problems to look for, are provided throughout our training guide. We're now going to move to the question and answer portions of the webinar. And as we do that, I'm putting up a slide with all of our panelists, as well as Wendy and my contact information. That information is also going to be being shared in the chat. So don't worry if you don't get this down right now, it will be in the chat of the webinar. And Emily, would you mind getting us started with the questions?
Sure. So I think the first question we can start with, I'm just going to go like a little bit out of order how they were coming in. But one question we got is, what is the best way for larger organizations to help support more localized movements like you folks have been taking part in pushing back against jail expansion? I think that's for everybody or whoever chooses to answer. It's not specific.
I think one of the most important things that we follow our own, just from the National Council's perspective, is that we'd never go into communities without getting to know the community, the organizations that are on the ground that are doing the work. And so we have ecosystem check-ins, and we're like, hey, like, how can we be supportive of you? Versus a lot of organizations just kind of like what would be like, just jump in and say, this is what you need to do. But what is important as a national organization is to, whatever state you're trying to work with, like, go in there and figure out what are the problems, get to know, pay homage to the land, and also get to know the people that are on the ground that are doing the work. And they will be able to tell you, you got to listen to the land. They will tell you what needs to be done and how you can plug in and what support you can give as a national organization. That's my perspective.
And I guess I'll just briefly answer as a rep from another national org, I guess, that I think it's really about capacity building, right? The folks that are on the ground, like Sashi was saying, they know what needs to happen. They know what reforms will be most impactful in their community. They know what other alternatives should be being designed, what sort of preventive measures should be being put in place. What we've found is that we tend to get asked for things, unsurprisingly, like data that groups might find helpful, like reviewing jail assessments. And we really do just try to kind of help groups in whatever ways are additive to their campaigns without imposing any sort of ideas on how things should be moving forward.
Great, thank you. Oh, sorry, go ahead,
So
Crystal.
I would just say that you do in fact do that. And that's been our experience as a local group, is that the groups that have helped us, Prison Policy Initiative and the ACLU, have really been respectful of like our knowledge and have supported us.
Okay, great. So another question that's come in is about if anybody has been able to partner with local public defender offices on these efforts, because they often have access to data to support these movements or other information, kind of like insider information. Have any of you utilized that, or do we know of anybody who has?
I think that I'll speak to this in a more broad way. I think like individual defense work of our people, either to stop our people from going in or to bring our people home, is like incredibly important. So we're a participatory defense hub here in Boston. So participatory defense is the movement strategy developed by Silicon Valley Debug in California. And then the National Council also helped to increase the reach of this and increase the number of hubs across the country with our Director of Participatory Defense, Justine Moore, training so many of us across the country to use this strategy. And it's just building on what people and families have done forever, which is like fight for our people, right? And instead of just stopping like outside the courtroom, you know, I can picture Raj in my head doing this part of the training. Like we have the free so-and-so signs outside and we would just stand there and look in the court. But really it's about going into the court and shifting the power dynamic. So many of you might already be practicing this. There might be a local hub that you work with. So public defenders can be brought into that process, right? With a people-led strategy, a community-led strategy to fight for our people, to represent our people as whole and needed and valued, to offer our own crafted alternative sentencing or diversion from conviction in the first place, and really bringing public defenders in to be part of that process, as opposed to sort of just another person in the system that's there for business as usual, asking you to accept a plea deal that you don't want, or sort of facilitating incarceration as the norm. So, you know, one thing that we're thinking about is, what does it look like to have individualized case review for those folks that have smaller jail or prison populations? Every single person getting an exit strategy, right? Every single person getting a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, about how they could come home. And that could look like engaging with law students to help with that review. That could look like engaging with folks that are in other type of law practices to come in and you know, support in other ways. Or that could be really pushing your local defender's office to join you in the resistance to the project, and to show how many people are in on certain types of charges or how they could come home. Anyway, defense work is an incredibly important part of both stopping people from going in and bringing people home. So definitely a strategy that we're using.
Great, thank you, everybody. All right, so another question that's come in is, do we have any advice for how to work against the alternatives to jail that include things like other types of carceral techniques like home incarceration, surveillance, other things that aren't technically jail but might sound good to folks who aren't totally involved, but these are still punishment and still take up resources?
I think that participatory defense is a really good tool to help fight against those, especially like if you're talking about like case by case situations. But also, I think that it's also important that we start why shifting the public opinion and changing the conversation is important, because a lot of people are advocating for ankle shackles. A lot of people are advocating for air incarceration. And then after we, you know, spend 10 years saying, oh, everybody needs an ankle shackle. And then when everybody gets an ankle shackle, they realize that it's another form of incarceration. And they're upset about the ankle shackle. And so this is why we need to listen to directly impacted people and the people that are leading the ground. And this is what we say, this is what we're talking about when we say dismantling the system, and not just like putting a Band-Aid on it or turning it to the left or turning it to the right, because it's only causing further harm. We know we're in, I mean, on my corner right now, they just installed another camera that I'm like, they're just gonna watch us go to the corner store, you know. Meanwhile, there's a police cruiser on the corner as well. These are all forms of that system of open air prisons, and it only causes more harm. So that's why we have to watch the bills that we pass. This is why we have to watch the organizations that we support, especially the national organizations that are not really connected to the ground, but think they're connected to the ground, but want to speak for the ground. And so it's important. And that's all.
Yeah, that's such an excellent answer and a massively important question. And I just want to affirm what Sasha said. It's just like all of us holding the line that those are not alternatives. So when we say, we do try to answer proactively the question, what else besides a jail or prison? And we are very clear that those are not alternatives that we're trying to build systemically. In the immediate, do we recognize that on individual freedom campaigns that people are going to take certain arrangements on an individual level for their own freedom toward the goal of liberation? Yes. But systemically, are we ever advocating for the expansion of incarceration, either in the open air or in the jail or prison? Absolutely not. And we talk about why that's not it. So some of it is offering what's working on the ground in your community. And what we always say is that doesn't have to be a program that specifically says we are an alternative to incarceration. Free housing is an alternative to incarceration. It is not a jail or a prison. Giving money directly to women is an alternative. It is giving people what they need to live so that they're not entrapped in the system. So we broaden the idea of what's possible. And then I think the other thing that's even, I think, more sort of insidious and something that we've had to like really push around allies is also just shifting the responsibility of incarcerating people to a different agency. For example, the Department of Mental Health. So we know that women have unmet mental health needs who are incarcerated, and just shifting the owner of the building who locks the doors at night to being DMH rather than DOC, the Department of Mental Health. First of all, our members are like, absolutely, we do not trust DMH. Like, they are very clear about their relationships with the Department of Mental Health, right? So we don't have any question about that. But for people outside that are like, but what about this? But what about this? That's also part of it, is that we're not just changing owners of the building. Like, we're really, really exploring what else is possible and what does different look like and pathways out of the system. So it's a really big challenge, but we're in it together, and we're developing what those things look like. So we have offerings to show that other things are possible. And also, just frankly, it's made up. I know I'm going on, but there's loved ones of us, like close members of ours, that come to our women's circle every Thursday that their parole officers insist on shackling them. They are in their 60s. It is just outrageous. Literally, one of our members who we brought home, who the state said she was supposed to die in prison, Miss Angie Jefferson, and her family and community led her fight for liberation. She is home after 31 years to be a mom and a grandmother. She has arthritis and significant, I'm not going to share her health business, right? But her ankle shackle is hurting her, like physically it's hurting her, right? And so it's made up that people have to be on their shackle when they come home on parole. That is something that does not have to exist. We should fight about it. We should get people's lawyers engaged in fighting these restrictive conditions of release. Like, we should, show up and say, as a community, like, we don't accept this, and we want our people home, and this is how we want our people to live, and like, just continue to fight those battles too, because it's shameful. It's shameful that, like Sashi is saying, it's at this point, it's become so normalized that even people who have perfect records of compliance with every other condition are still forced to be shackled, and just people go along with it because they don't have the support or resources to challenge it. So we should absolutely be doing that as well.
All right, I think we have time for probably one more of the questions that have come in, but definitely feel free to reach out to the panelists, to everybody here. Everybody's willing to kind of tackle any other questions that don't get answered live in the webinar. So I think for the last question, I think we'll go with this one, which is about what to do if the decision has already been made to expand a jail or to begin construction on a new jail. Like, is there anything left to do? What can people do? Where should they be looking? for next steps? It sounds like there's a specific situation in California where there's not a lot of opposition to the jail, and so that the folks here are obviously in opposition and trying to figure it out. I don't know, whoever wants to answer that one, please go ahead.
I wanted to say one thing, because so we know that the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And so they might still build a new women's jail. And it's just when we talked about the prison and jail moratorium bill, one thing that we didn't mention, Mallory, is that through all of our hard work and public awareness, we actually got the moratorium bill passed. And the governor vetoed the bill. Okay. So the people spoke, but the governor just was like, I don't really care what people said. It's what I want. So that shows that the system is going to do what they want to do regardless. And one of the beautiful things that our founder, Andrea James, said, also my mom, she said that if reimagining communities is so important and giving people the tools that they need so that way we can create healthy, thriving people, so they can create healthy, thriving communities, it's so important because, yes, if they go build all these new prisons and jails, imagine a world where, like in the Planet of the Apes, we have given our people all the tools of success that they have needed, that they won't even have any interactions with the police and jails and prisons because they have what they need to be successful. And so the prisons and jails will be just like these, like she had a vision of like these green trees just growing over it and just like, being all rotten because nobody's in there. Because we've given the people what they needed. So this is why we are on the ground creating the tools and giving people the tools and the infrastructure that people need, so we don't even have any interactions with jails and prisons. So I'm really sorry in California that y'all are at a space where it feels like y'all have nowhere to turn. But the best place to turn is to the people and figure out what can we give to the people so that way they're not even going into the prison and jail. And then we start to talk about clemency so that way we can bring our long timers home. And I want to uplift Miss Angie because Miss Angie was incarcerated to die in prison, right? But she's home right now. And she was just on participatory defense with us last week. And she's probably going to be on with us this weekend. Like, we have beautiful conversations. So don't ever think that if your family member or loved one is sentenced to die in prison, that there is no avenue for them to come home, because there is always a space for them to come home. You just have to fight and you have to just keep chugging along and have faith. And that's it. And just remember, the system is going to do what it's designed to do. And that's why until we dismantle it, we have to create our own system.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say just keep building the resistance, like the beautiful organizers on this call that are resisting, like Sashi said, turn to the community, door knock, canvas, let people know about it, because so often our people would be against it, but we're busy working, we're busy parenting, we're sort of drowning in our own stuff, and the states and the cities try to hide this from our people. So educating to prevent any further, or like engaging people in ongoing resistance, like what could creatively be done at or near the site to raise awareness that there are community members that don't want this. There are people that are loved and cared about that they're planning to move into this building, and they should be moved home and come home instead, So, yeah, I keep going for sure.
Yeah, and one thing that I was taught is that, so if we don't fail, but if they do build a prison and jail in that state, and we keep going and shifting public awareness and having people, move towards what different is, we have to remember that the organizing we're doing is impacting 7 generations forward and 7 generations behind us. So yes, this year they built a new jail, but if we keep going and keep fighting, next year they won't build no new jail, and the year after that, and the year after that, or the generation after that, that might be the last jail that they might ever build in the history of jail building. So we have to have faith.
I love that, having faith. The other thing that here in Berks County, people are like, well, why do you think the commissioners sort of changed their mind a bit? And I was thinking about it, and I'm thinking, I think it might be inflation. and the recession. So if you're new, if you're in a community, the question asker, and they haven't started building yet, and you probably already done this, but know how much every little bit of it costs. Because they let, in one of the meetings, they said, you know, oh yeah, we're gonna not have work release anymore, and that'll bring down a pod, and that'll be $8 million in building costs for one pod. And then, you know, that pod has to be staffed, right? 24/7, like the amount of money. So if you can say, hey, in a time of record expense for construction, you're going to build this, you know, I kind of feel like that's what impacted some of the decision in our county.
Thank you, everyone. And I'd also like just refer folks back to like the RFP technical challenges Mallory was mentioning too. Sometimes there still haven't been decisions on the number of beds. There might be certain interventions that are.
And I'm so sorry, I just put in the chat. I don't know where my, don't forget about the architecture firms that probably have an office in your state and the construction companies. And like, so our union siblings could be a source of power, right? Like the union member to union member, like how do we communicate about actually the people that are building the walls and pouring the concrete? Like individuals are choosing to advance the project, and it's always an opportunity to talk to people about what else is possible, build something else instead. Like we don't want to take money out of our community members' pockets, and we want to like create a vision of what we could be building instead. And so lots of opportunities to talk to all types of decision makers, even decision makers that are like showing up to their job site for the day.
Absolutely. And I realize we're hitting the time we told folks we'd be wrapping up at. So I just want to give each of the panelists, maybe if you could keep it to like 1.5 minutes, just share some advice for folks who are getting started or actively involved in fights to stop jail expansion, or any challenges you face that were anticipated that folks might find useful.
I could go first. So this is basically what we did. Attend every meeting, take notes, collect data, question their assumptions, make and broaden your community connections, get press coverage, attend the budget proposal presentations, make the fiscal arguments, know who is in your jail and make it public. Make sure everybody knows who's in your jail, and presume that you have a place at the decision-making table.
I'll go and then pass it to Sash. I just saw a couple questions, you know, about the conditions of confinement really being heavy on our hearts. We know people by name. We love people in these jails and prisons. They're our siblings, they're our friends, they're our cousins, they're our children. And at the end of the day, like, it's never going to, there is no such thing as a safe prison for women or for people. All of our people who survive, you know, tell us that. And then also the politicians conveniently want to improve these conditions only when it's good or right for them, or there's a benefit for them. It's for years, people languish and try to raise issues and they fall on deaf ears. And it's only when it's profitable or beneficial to the people in power that ever gets addressed. So I would say, you know, as coming from a state with the oldest women's prison in the United States, that DOC is going to DOC in any building we put women in with them. So we're fighting for our women's freedom, and we're fighting for what else is possible. And that we're really holding the line around that to bring our people home and showing that we can do it with individual cases and continuing to do it. So, and then supporting each other across the country by echoing what we're saying. So free her. And good luck to y'all, and hopefully you can be comrades, and I'll pass it to you, Sash.
No, I really feel like, you know, I'm really happy to have this platform, and then also like have the solidarity. And I hope that this conversation that we had today reaches people to, one, think about the alternatives that we can think about, or not the alternatives, like I said, the preventative methods that we can take to not have anybody incarcerated, and then also to begin to listen to the blueprint that formerly incarcerated women are giving you. So that is grounded in abolition, that is grounded in the people. And that is really creating what different looks like, so that way we can finally get out into the world that this is not like an imaginary world. This is like really happening on the ground. Like people are really creating a crisis response team. People are really creating housing programs. Like all these things are really happening. And you know, I would love to connect with more people. So if you reach out to the National Council, Families for Justice Healing, like I said, I know that there are people in the community that are doing the same type of work, but maybe in a different shape and form that works best for their city or state or wherever their community. And we would love to figure out what does that look like, because we're all student teachers and we all have a lot to learn, and then we all have a lot to teach. And so I'm excited, and cheers to a future with no jails, prisons, or police, and cheers to a future that is grounded in the healing and well-being and support of all people. Free her.
I just want to quickly make a pitch. I mean, there's no way to follow all that, but to just question any kind of information that's put forward by the sort of like architects or the construction, whoever's doing these assessments. I have yet to see an assessment where we didn't find some kind of hole in it that we could sort of push back on. So yeah, don't assume that those are written by people more expert than you. And feel free to reach out to other folks, you know, folks here at PPI or folks wherever you know people, and have them like help you read that with a critical eye and try and find some opportunities to push back, because that's very persuasive for folks when they start to see, oh, the experts, you know, mess something up, or they're trying to put one over on us or something. So I think that's a pretty successful strategy that I've seen folks use. Obviously, it's only one of very many, but it's something that, you know, we here at PPI can also help with. So that's my pitch.
Amazing. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone who attended, for your time. I know we didn't get to all the questions. We had a lot come in. Again, if you have a question that wasn't answered, don't hesitate to reach out to any of today's panelists. Everyone's information was shared in the chat. We hope that this webinar is helpful and will be helpful to your future efforts. Materials shared by our presenters are at the link in the chat and will be shared with you along with the video of this presentation when it is online. You'll see a survey when you close your web browser as you exit, and you'll receive it by email tomorrow as well. Please respond if you'd like to provide feedback, or let us know about other topics you'd like to hear about in the future. If you'd like to receive more information from Prison Policy Initiative about future programming or our work, please sign up for our newsletter through our website, and follow us on social media at Prison Policy on both Twitter and Instagram. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today. Have a good rest of your day.